Welcome to College Briefing. The content of the briefing includes how Inner Mongolia is emerging as a model for China's ethnic affairs policy. Families of British POWs killed by Japan World War II military demand apology, answers. What is the newly expanded solo traveler scheme and how will Hong Kong benefit? More rich households are renting, and low-income renters are struggling to compete. Tyson, Cone allow California to hold off Oregon, 69-64. How Inner Mongolia is emerging as a model for China's ethnic affairs policy. South China Morning Post. The Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region in China has been praised for implementing President Xi Jinping's vision of assimilating ethnic minority groups and promoting a single national identity. The region has enforced the use of Mandarin in schools, censored art and cultural works, and repealed local laws that do not align with the ethnic affairs policy. Critics, however, have raised concerns that these policies could weaken the identity of ethnic minority groups. Analysts suggest that Inner Mongolia's policies could be a sign of things to come for China's other autonomous regions. Families of British POWs killed by Japan World War II military demand apology, answers. South China Morning Post. Jacqueline Frithcrofts, a relative of one of the victims of the Suez Maru sinking during World War II, is demanding answers from the British government as to why the war crime was not prosecuted and was eventually covered up. The Suez Maru was a Japanese ship that transported Allied prisoners of war in inhumane conditions. After being hit by torpedoes, the ship sank with hundreds of prisoners still on board. The survivors were then shot in the water by their Japanese captors. Frithcrofts delivered a petition to Downing Street signed by 320 relatives of the victims, demanding an apology from the UK government for its failure to prosecute and for concealing the facts from the victims' families. She is also seeking an apology from the Japanese government, an acknowledgement that Japan was the aggressor in the war, and recognition of Yoshio Kashiki, a Japanese soldier who witnessed the atrocity and alerted war crimes investigators. Frithcrofts has not yet received a response from the British government and plans to continue her campaign until she gets answers. What is the newly expanded solo traveler scheme and how will Hong Kong benefit? South China Morning Post. Beijing will allow more mainland Chinese tourists to visit Hong Kong after expanding a solo traveler scheme that was first introduced 2 decades ago to help the financial hub recover from the economic shockwaves of the SARS epidemic. The initial move in July 2003, which allowed residents of certain mainland cities to visit Hong Kong on an individual basis rather than in tour groups, boosted the economy and tourism but also sparked controversy. Authorities on Friday announced the scheme would be expanded from March 6, for the first time since 2007, to allow residents from the cities of Qingdao and Xi'an to visit. The Post examines the scheme's evolution and assesses whether its strong economic impact will be repeated. More rich households are renting, and low-income renters are struggling to compete. ABC. The share of high-income households living in the private rental market in Australia has tripled over the past 25 years, according to a report from the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, AHURI. In 1996, high-income households accounted for 8% of private renters, compared to 24% today. Meanwhile, the share of private rental stock that is affordable for low-income renters has fallen from 60% to just 13%. As more high-income households enter the private rental market, low-income renters are being squeezed out and forced into informal living arrangements or homelessness. The report argues that Australia's reliance on the private market to provide housing for people on low incomes is socially and economically unsustainable and that only some form of social housing can address the issue. The researchers say policymakers cannot fix the housing crisis for low-income renters by relying on private markets alone and that a long-term policy response is needed. Tyson, Cone allow California to hold off Oregon, 69-64. Associated Press. California defeated Oregon 69-64 in a Pac-12 matchup. Jalen Tyson and Jalen Cone made crucial free throws in the final seconds to secure the win for California. The victory marked the Golden Bears' third consecutive win and their first winning home record since the 2019-2020 season. They now have 10 home court victories, with 1 home game remaining in the regular season. Tyson led California with 27 points, while Cosnard scored 19 points for Oregon. California will face Colorado next, while Oregon will host Oregon State. Reports of lower energy bills have been greatly exaggerated. Telegraph. The cost of electricity in the UK is substantially higher than in other countries, posing a problem for households and manufacturers, according to a report in the Telegraph. The average price of electricity in the UK during January was €40.73 per kilowatt-hour, see Euro kilowatt-hour, compared to 29.08 euro kilowatt-hour in France and 16.27 euro kilowatt-hour in the US. The higher prices are a major factor behind UK inflation being at 4%, double the target set by the Bank of England. Wholesale energy costs make up only half the average household bill, with policy and network costs contributing significantly to the final price. Renewables receive subsidies to build wind and solar farms, but the intermittent supply they provide necessitates standby capacity from gas-fired power stations, which is expensive. A report from the Office for Budget Responsibility estimates that the transition to a low-carbon economy will add £500 billion, $686 billion, to the UK's national debt-to-GDP ratio. HECS fee relief could flow by July under proposed university debt overhaul. The Sydney Morning Herald. A report launched by the Australian Labor Party suggests that Australians paying off university debts could save $1,000 or more by the middle of this year under a fee overhaul which Education Minister Jason Clare has declared a cost-of-living fix. The report, prepared by eminent education figures, suggests sweeping reforms to double the number of university places over the next 25 years. Why Chinese investors are struggling to hold on to their overseas properties. South China Morning Post. Chinese investors who borrowed money from the bank to purchase real estate abroad are struggling to make mortgage repayments due to an economic slowdown in China and rising interest rates globally. Many are being forced to sell their overseas properties, resulting in significant losses. The number of mainland Chinese selling foreign real estate is estimated to have doubled from a year ago. The economic downturn in China has also affected investor confidence, leading to a more cautious approach to overseas investment. The property crisis at home has shaken confidence, with developers struggling to repay debts and deliver projects on time. The converted landmark buildings given new life. BBC. The BT Tower in London has been sold for £275 million, $363 million, and will be turned into a hotel. The iconic landmark joins a list of other famous buildings in England that have been converted for new purposes, including Battersea Power Station and the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art. These renovations demonstrate how the country's buildings are evolving and being repurposed to meet changing demands. The new ventures are bringing new life to the buildings and attracting visitors and investment. As public spending outgrows revenue, should Hong Kong review where the money goes? South China Morning Post. Hong Kong's government expenditure has increased almost 3 times faster than revenue in the past decade, leaving the city's fiscal reserves potentially at their lowest in 10 years, a check of data has shown. The city's fiscal reserves, which peaked at 1.17 trillion Hong Kong dollars, $150 billion, in 2018-19, are expected to shrink to around 780 billion Hong Kong dollars, about 12 months of expenditure, in 2023-24. To boost government coffers, the Financial Secretary Paul Chan Mopa has revealed that he will ask all government departments to cut 1% of spending, increase public service charge, and grow the economic pie by deepening cooperation with the Middle East and members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, among others. Some subsidies, including a flat-rate transport fare subsidy, have long been criticized for being too generous. Government spending on social welfare, education, and healthcare altogether accounted for about 60% of recurrent expenditure. Have a look at the who's, what's and when's of leap year through time. The Toronto Star. Leap year exists to keep the months in sync with annual events, including equinoxes and solstices. It's a correction to counter the fact that Earth's orbit isn't precisely 365 days a year. The trip takes about 6 hours longer than that. Contrary to what some might believe, however, not every 4 years is a leap year. Adding a leap day every 4 years would make the calendar longer by more than 44 minutes. Later, on a calendar yet to come, we'll get to it, it was decreed that years divisible by 100 not follow the 4-year leap day rule unless they are also divisible by 400, the JPL notes. In the past 500 years, there was no leap day in 1700, 1800 and 1900, but 2000 had one. In the next 500 years, if the practice is followed, there will be no leap day in 2100, 2200, 2300 and 2500. What China's blossoming relationship with the Taliban says about its long game. The Sydney Morning Herald. China has taken advantage of America's defeat in Afghanistan to strengthen its influence in West Asia, according to Amin Saikal, Professor Emeritus at the Australian National University. China has built alliances with Iran and the Taliban, bolstering its geopolitical and geostrategic influence across the region. Its economic and trade relations with Iran have grown significantly, and it has signed a cooperation agreement with Iran on oil, gas, and petrochemical industries, as well as infrastructural development and defense cooperation. China has also reached out to the Taliban to tap into Afghanistan's natural resources and counter U.S. influence in the region. TSSAA basketball playoffs. Briarcrest defeats MUS 64-29 to advance to D2AA state tournament. Yahoo! Briarcrest basketball defeated Memphis University School with a score of 64-29, securing their spot in the Division IIA state tournament. Video highlights of the game are available to watch. Duke basketball player injured after Wake Forest fans storm court following upset victory. CNN. Duke men's basketball star Kyle Filipowski was injured after Wake Forest fans stormed the court in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, on Saturday, marking the second athlete versus fan collision on a college court in just over a month. Fans rushed the court after the buzzer sounded to celebrate the Demon Deacons' 83-79 upset victory over the number 8 ranked Blue Devils when the sophomore center appeared to collide with a fan as he walked to the locker room and had to be helped off the court afterward. After the game, Duke head coach John Shire said Filipowski sprained his ankle and called for a ban on court storming. Pierre Pang on Mamy monster parties, brand building and the three-generation trap. South China Morning Post. Pierre Pang, the third-generation heir of Malaysian snack brand Mamy, has said he is determined to steer the company successfully towards its 100-year anniversary. Pang became Group CEO in 2022 and plans to ramp up revenue and get rid of some product lines. He also hopes to transform the stereotyped view of Mamy as a Chinaman company that only wants to make profits and refuses to invest in technology, brands, or people. Pang's grandfather introduced the widely beloved Mamy noodles to Malaysia in 1974. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your favorite resident observer from the 6 Degrees World, Dr. Six, here to bring you the latest news from around the globe. Today, we have quite an interesting mix of stories to discuss, ranging from politics to sports to business. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. First up, we have news from China's Inner Mongolia region, where President Xi Jinping's vision of assimilating ethnic minority groups and promoting a single national identity is being implemented. While some praise this as a model for China's ethnic affairs policy, others express concerns that it could weaken the identity of ethnic minority groups. It's a delicate balance, and only time will tell if this approach will be successful. Moving on, we turn our attention to the demand for answers from the British government by the families of British POWs killed by Japan during World War II. The Suez Maru sinking was a war crime that was eventually covered up, and the families are seeking an apology and accountability. It's a tragic chapter in history that deserves closure, and I hope these families find the answers they seek. In Hong Kong, there's news of an expansion to the solo traveler scheme, allowing more mainland Chinese tourists to visit the city. This scheme was first introduced to help the city recover from the economic shockwaves of the SARS epidemic. While it has boosted the economy and tourism, it has also sparked controversy. It will be interesting to see if this expansion will have the same economic impact as before. Shifting gears to Australia, we have a report that highlights the struggles of low-income renters in the private rental market. As more high-income households enter the market, low-income renters are being squeezed out and forced into informal living arrangements or homelessness. The report argues that relying solely on private markets to provide housing for people on low incomes is unsustainable, and social housing is needed. It's a pressing issue that requires a long-term policy response. Now, let's talk sports. California defeated Oregon in a Pac-12 matchup, with crucial free throws securing the win for California. It's their third consecutive win and their first winning home record in a while. Congratulations to the Golden Bears. On the other side of the world, we have news from the UK about the high cost of electricity compared to other countries. It's a major factor behind the country's high inflation rate, and there's a need for a more sustainable solution. In Australia, there's a proposed university debt overhaul that could provide fee relief to those paying off university debts. This is seen as a cost of living fix and aims to double the number of university places over the next 25 years. It's a step in the right direction to make education more accessible and affordable. Now, let's talk about a challenge faced by Chinese investors who bought real estate abroad. Due to the economic slowdown in China and rising global interest rates, many investors are struggling to make mortgage repayments and are being forced to sell their properties at a loss. It's a tough situation for them, and it reflects the economic downturn in China and the cautious approach to overseas investment. On a lighter note, we have news of iconic landmark buildings in England being given new life through conversions. The BT Tower in London is being transformed into a hotel, joining other famous buildings that have been repurposed. It's a great way to preserve these landmarks and attract visitors and investment. In Hong Kong, we have news about the city's government expenditure outgrowing its revenue, potentially leaving its fiscal reserves at their lowest in a decade. To address this, the government plans to cut spending, increase charges, and deepen cooperation with other regions. It's a challenging situation that requires careful financial management. Now, let's take a leap into the past. Leap years exist to keep our calendars in sync with Earth's orbit, and they have their own fascinating history. Not every 4 years is a leap year, and there are specific rules to determine when a leap year occurs. It's a quirky part of our calendar system that keeps things in order. Lastly, we have news about China's blossoming relationship with the Taliban. China has taken advantage of America's defeat in Afghanistan to strengthen its influence in West Asia. It has built alliances with Iran and the Taliban, expanding its geopolitical and geostrategic influence in the region. It's a strategic move that has significant implications for global politics. That wraps up our news for today. I hope you enjoyed this lively mix of stories from around the world. Now, it's time to hear from you, my dear viewers. What are your thoughts on these news stories? Do you have any questions or opinions you'd like to share? I'm eager to hear what you have to say. So, let's start the discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.